Hi, you are watching this video because you missed our in-class time this week, February 22nd. Let's see, things we did. We went over the schedule. We looked at a bunch of different memes for different classroom procedures for coming back into the classroom. And then we got right to it. We're starting our unit on Reconstruction, which is putting the country back together after the Civil War. So you need to get out your social studies notebook, please. You need to write these notes down. I'll be looking for them when you return to class on whatever day you're coming in this week. So please get them out. All right, a reminder, in social studies, you are underlining, or you are writing down whatever's underlined. If it's not underlined, you don't need to worry about it. I'm going to give you a lot of extra information this unit because I really love Reconstruction, so I give you a lot of information. You are only responsible to write down what is underlined. So let's start by anchoring ourselves where we are in U.S. history. This is all underlined, so you're going to write it down. Feel free to pause the video as you go. I'm going to go kind of fast, so feel free to pause the video when you need to. Antebellum is a pre-war period before the Civil War. We talked about how we got different pieces of land. We talked about those pieces of land being turned into states and how every time that happened, there was a discussion on whether they should be slave states or free states. And they made a bunch of compromises over slavery, and that didn't work because it eventually, the country broke in half. The South seceded into the U.S. Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. The North and Lincoln were successful in keeping the country together, and then we start the period in U.S. history of Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877, putting back together the country. So you want to write this definition down. Reconstruction Era, the U.S. put resources into the South to build the country back up and to help the newly freed African Americans. By and large, the South wasn't infrastructurally damaged that much. But until towards the end of the war, you have a general named Sherman. He takes a big chunk of the Northern Army and marches down to the Georgian Sea and destroys everything in his path. He calls this total war. He really wanted to make sure the South was not going to come back and try this again. And they burn farm fields, they burn entire cities to kind of this path of destruction that he lays bare on the South. So I have just a couple pictures. They used to take the railroad ties and heat them up and then bend them around trees. Those are called Sherman's neckties. So you could see all of these railroad ties bent around trees, the path that Sherman's army took. You have an entire generation of men who didn't come home, came home without limbs, because if you're going to be shot, they were not going to take the bullet out because of infection, and it was just too hard and they didn't have time. They were just going to saw off your leg or your arm. So you had a lot of amputees coming back from the war and a lot of soldiers coming home with soldier's hurt, which was what they call post-traumatic stress syndrome back in the Civil War. A couple more pictures of some destruction of the South. And then they made good on the North claim that they were going to free slaves. They free slaves. Sorry, that's the bell. They free slaves, 4 million new freed people who need to be incorporated into the economy and incorporated into, society after they were freed. So it's a ton of people, so that was big work to do. We also looked at a couple different things. So you're going to fill out the worksheet that's attached to the email. The first part of the worksheet, you see a graph. You're going to just copy the pattern of this graph. So you can see it goes up a little bit, then it kind of falters, then there's nothing, and then it goes up towards the end. This is a graph of African American Congress people. So you get a good amount of African American Congress people elected after the Civil War, and then it kind of falters, and then there's nothing for about 80 years. This is about 1869. It starts to decline about 1873 or so. And then about 1879, it stops and doesn't pick back up again until 1955. And then goes all the way up. Today, we're actually higher today. We're in the 117th Congress. We have 59 African-American Congress people, both men and women, which is the highest it's ever been in history. So on your worksheet, you're kind of hypothesizing why is there this gap here? Like, why did it stop? and then why did it pick back up? And do your best to take a guess. You don't have to be right on that. Okay, and then you're going to flip to the back side of that worksheet. You see a chart at the top. The First Amendment is the 13th Amendment. We passed 3 major Reconstruction amendments during the Civil War. 13th Amendment gets rid of slavery. And then find one other detail in here that you can write in on that chart. 14th Amendment is you cannot be denied rights as a citizen. They passed, the Northerners, mainly the Northern Republicans, passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments right away because they know the South are going to try to deny rights to the newly freed African Americans. And one of the first things the South argues is because slaves used to be considered property, they can't just come in as citizens. And the North is like, yeah, they can. And they passed the 14th Amendment. So even though it was previously written into the Constitution, it kind of re-solidifies that any persons born or naturalized in the United States can't be denied life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, property, and whatnot. Okay? So find another detail to write down for the 14th Amendment on that worksheet. There's a lot in there. You just have to pick one other detail. So if you don't want to read it all, that's okay. And then we have the 15th Amendment, can't deny the right to vote. And then find one more detail. This was the amendment that said you can't deny the right to vote on race, color, or previous servitude, meaning you can't say just because they were a slave before they can't vote. We're going to see the South get around this using black codes and Jim Crow laws, however. Okay, make sure you have these 3 amendments written down if you didn't previously write them down. And then the other thing we went over was Jim Crow laws. We talked about, so Jim Crow laws were these laws that the South put in to get around the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment that made African Americans' lives harder. And we'll talk more into this unit about really where this Jim Crow laws and black codes come from and why they're implemented. But you need to, that last chart on your worksheet, pick out some Jim Crow laws. 4 of them, and write them into that chart and then answer that bottom question. So I'm going to be looking for this work when you come back, and I hope to see you in class next week. Please email or Google chat with questions.